Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the March 4th, 2013 Town of Los Gatos Joint Town Council Parking Authority meeting. First of all, I would ask all of you with your smart cell phones here, please turn them off or put them on vibrate. And secondly, I would ask that if you haven't already done so, and you intend to speak on any item on our agenda, to submit one of these beige cards to our clerk over here. And Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Joe Przinsky.
Here.
Councilmember Marcia Jensen.
Here.
Councilmember Diane McNutt.
Here.
Vice Mayor Steve Leonardis.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Barbara Spector.
Here. As is our custom, every meeting, we have a stellar student from the community come up here and lead us in the salute to the flag. So that you can see the person about whom I am speaking, I will ask him to come up here and join me at the front of the dais. God, you're clapping for him before you even heard about him. It's only going to go up from here. This is Nathaniel Vemery. Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Fourth grader at Alta Vista Elementary School. Art is his favorite subject, and he won second place for a poster designed for the Santa Clara Ottoman Society. He plays the trumpet, is a violinist, and loves acting in school plays. He plays concerts for the elderly in Morgan Hill. He does taekwondo. He has a Siamese cat. And watch out, everybody up here on the dais, because he will run for student council this year. Round of applause. If you'll please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Go over there. Did you already say hello to him? No, I sent it to David. Another round of applause. Once again, if you intend to speak on any item on our agenda, please hand these cards over to our clerk. Closed session report.
Thank you. The council met in closed session tonight as duly noticed regarding conference with labor negotiator. The council took no action and there's nothing to report out tonight.
Thank you. Council matters. Ms. McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be reporting out as you've requested. I attended the Santa Clara County Recycling and Waste Reduction Commission meeting last week. We talked about our work plan for the year. And of interest to Los Gatos is we're going to be working on strategies to encourage manufacturers or retailers to take back batteries, sharps, fluorescent lights, paint, and pharmaceuticals in order to keep them out of the landfill. And there may be a request for resolution on that, and I'll be bringing that back later in the year.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Przinsky.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I attended the Metropolitan Transportation Commission meeting last week in Oakland, and the focus was on the Bay Bridge opening, which will take place Labor Day weekend, and there'll be more information coming as things progress.
Anyone else? Mr. Leonardis.
I attended the Solid Waste Advisory Committee meeting, and they're looking at a new contract starting in 2014 through 2021.
All right. Anyone else? I attended the West Valley Mayor Managers meeting this past week where the staff of Cupertino gave a presentation on their plastic bag charging station program and ordinances that they have there. Also, along with Mr. Przinski, this past week we had a general plan committee where we reconsidered the overlay zones and sent them back to staff to look at all the locations throughout the town. Now, normally in our agenda, we hear from the manager at this point. However, there are no manager matters, and we will go to we will have Jonathan. I have to get his title correct, though. On Did You Know, we have Jonathan Knowles, Chairman of the Board of Directors of Los Gatos Music and Arts, who will be coming up and giving us a presentation on this year's Music in the Park series. Jonathan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Did you know that Music in the Park has been putting on concerts for 26 years in our fine town? While Music in the Park partners with the town, it's funded by the generous financial sponsorship of local businesses and donations of community members. We receive no public funds. Did you know Music in the Park was originally managed by the Los Gatos Arts and Culture Commission? It has for the last 4 years been produced by Los Gatos Music and Arts, the local nonprofit community benefit organization, which also produces Jazz on the Plaz and funds scholarships and arts programs for youth. Music in the Park has a common thread and has had so since its earliest days through longtime community resident and local business owner Terry Hope. She's here tonight. Terry was originally a member of the Arts Commission and chair of Music in the Park in its earliest days and is currently part of the Los Gatos Music and Arts leadership team. While its roots were modest, Music in the Park now hosts between 3,000 and 5,000 residents and visitors each Sunday in the summer for 10 weeks on the Civic Center lawn. This year, Los Gatos Music and Arts is pleased to share a much more diverse music experience than previous years with a fabulous lineup of artists that we are announcing publicly tonight for the first time. All of you council members will receive, if you have not already, the printed version of this. But for more information, you can visit the Los Gatos patch day after tomorrow or lgmip.com or pick up any of the printed lineup brochures that Terry has here that we'll put out on the lobby for people to take tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jonathan. All right, we are now on that part of our agenda, consent items. We have 2 items on our consent calendar. First of all, looking to council. Does anybody on the council wish to pull an item from our consent calendar? Seeing no one, does anyone from the audience wish to pull an item from the consent calendar? No one's coming forward. May I have a motion? Mr. Leonardis?
Move to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
A motion and second. Discussion. Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. We are now at verbal communications. This is the opportunity for anyone in the audience wishing to speak on an item not on this evening's agenda to come forward. You will have 3 minutes. I do not have a card from anyone with regard to verbal communications, but does anyone want to speak to us on verbal communications on an item not on our agenda? No one's coming forward, so we will now go to public hearings. Now, I'm going to read the title of this public hearing, and then I'm going to share with you all how we will be proceeding this evening. This public hearing is called A Consideration of Adopting an Urgency Ordinance Establishing a Temporary Moratorium on the Establishment of Commercial Operations Engaged in the Sales of Retail Firearms, Ammunition, and/or Explosive Devices. As many, if not all of you probably know, we've had 2 hearings so far this year on Templar-related issues. We've had probably 100 speakers address us, and all of those 2 hearings and all of those speakers and all of the information we received led to this meeting this evening, with this agenda item. So I have a lot of cards, and as chair, it is my objective this evening to listen to everybody, but also to give the council the opportunity to consider the evidence and to make its decision. With that in mind, I'm going to start off by getting the staff to make its report. Then the council will have the opportunity to ask questions of staff. We will then turn to the audience based on the cards you have submitted, and then we'll go from there. So let's start with staff, and I don't know who's going to lead. Ms. Bailey, you're going to lead the presentation.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. First of all, I'd like to point out that in addition to your staff report, you also have an addendum report and a desk item report. On February 11th, the Town Council adopted staff's recommendation to research, study, and return to a future meeting with information necessary to consider potential town ordinances and policy changes for 6 items. The first item is to designate which land use zones may be appropriate for the sale of firearms and ammunition, including consideration of appropriate proximity limits from schools, parks, and selected establishments. Second was to require a conditional use permit for the sale of firearms and ammunition. Third is to restrict home occupation permits for the sale of firearms and ammunition. Fourth is to establish a police permit requirement for dealers of firearms and ammunition. Fifth was to require identification checks for the sale of ammunition. And lastly, 6 was require the reporting of lost or stolen firearms. This is the first time ever that the town has considered land use regulations for firearms. In addition, council directed staff to prepare an urgency ordinance for the meeting of March 4th to consider placing a temporary moratorium on the establishment of commercial operations engaged in the sale of firearms, ammunition, and/or destructive devices within the town of Los Gatos, to allow staff time to study and consider the land uses related to firearms and ammunition, as I presented earlier and as is shown on the overhead. The Planning Division of the Community Development Department is presenting the proposed urgency interim ordinance as it is a land use matter. To summarize the proposed urgency ordinance, during the period the moratorium is in effect, the town will not issue any type of permits associated with the start or expansion of commercial operations engaged in the sale of firearms, ammunition, and/or destructive devices. As stated in the proposed urgency interim ordinance, any existing person or business that is holding a valid federal firearms license and state certificate of eligibility for the sale of firearms and/or ammunition is not prohibited from continuing their existing business operation. If adopted, the ordinance is effective for no more than 45 days. Pursuant to state requirements, prior to the 45-day expiration, council can extend the ordinance for 10 months and 15 days, which is at a public hearing. The police chief, town attorney, planning, and other staff members are here tonight if you have any questions, and that concludes the presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey. Questions for staff? Ms. McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to clarify, because we've had so many email communications regarding this, the moratorium would not be applicable to Templar. Yes or no?
That is correct.
And would it be applicable to other retailers in town, hardware store or whatever, that currently does not sell firearms but decides they want to add that to their inventory?
That is correct. Yes, it would apply.
It would apply.
Correct.
Thank you.
Ms. Jensen.
I have a question regarding your comment. You said that the moratorium would not apply to the specific operation of Templar Sports, which you defined as retail sales of firearms. And my question goes to whether repair, manufacture, or modification of firearms could be included in the moratorium. I understand that staff has interpreted existing town zoning regulations to conclude that those types of operations or uses are incidental to the retail use. And I'm wondering whether that interpretation is subject to a different interpretation if the council were to decide that that was appropriate.
With respect to Councilmember Jensen's question, if council wants to include other language in a moratorium and can articulate findings to support that on an urgency basis, that would be allowable. However, with respect to anything that is added as to the moratorium, to the extent that any licensed firearms commercial operations is operating and has existing uses, that would not be impacted during that moratorium period.
I'm sorry, you're out of order. I heard you. Thank you. I will ask the town attorney, who I understand is not feeling at her best, to be closer to the microphone, but I am asking that nobody from the audience speak out that way, please. Do you have anything further to ask, Ms. Prop? Say, Ms. Prop.
I don't at this time.
Okay. Other questions? Seeing none. All right. Now, as I said, we have had 2 hearings on this related issue. We have listened to about 100 people speak. We have had many, many hundreds of emails. I have a lot of people who want to speak this evening, and I have a council who want to consider this issue. So all of that being said, what I am going to do is I will give each speaker 2 minutes to speak, and then we'll be able to hopefully get through you all and give us an opportunity to consider this moratorium. So the first person to speak, and remember you have 2 minutes, and another thing I'm going to say is, remember what the subject matter is, as I read it: consideration of adopting an urgency ordinance establishing a temporary moratorium. And also, if you have other folks here in this room who agree with you, you can just give us their names. They can raise their hands. If they're in the other room in the back of us where we can't see them, you can just tell us 15 people, 5 people agree with what I'm saying. So that way we can get the impact of your presentation without having to listen to the same thing many times repeatedly. So I appreciate in advance your cooperation, and the first speaker is Terry Shaftel. Terry Shaftel, and after Mr. Shaftel will be, looks like Charles Rawlings.
Is this a 2-minute or 3-minute time?
This is 2 minutes.
Okay. So thank you very much for calling on me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk in front of you. The question I have, and I haven't heard an answer to this yet, is why have a moratorium at all? I know that there is a desire on the part of some of the people here to not have guns at all in Los Gatos, and they feel that not having a gun store will prevent that. Obviously, that's not true. But back to my question, why have the moratorium? There is absolutely no evidence that this store or any store like it has caused any damage to this neighborhood. And yet here we are talking about an emergency, not just a normal ordinance, but an emergency ordinance to handle a problem that does not exist. I don't, for one, understand why we need to go through that. California has very strict laws regarding the sale and ownership of guns. They have very strict rules about training and who can have one. That should be sufficient. It's one of the toughest rules in all of the United States. So again, I go back to the question, I have not heard an answer to this. Why is it necessary, given the hysteria around here about guns, to have a moratorium? What does that actually accomplish other than possibly calm some people down? So that is my question to you. I hope you consider that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Charles Rawlings, who will be followed by Hans Johnson, or Jonsen.
Thank you very much, and members of council, for the opportunity to speak. I think the answer to your question is 2 dead policemen last week, 5 people killed over the weekend, a rising tide of violence in our society. Cause and effect can be argued endlessly, but we're in a very dangerous situation now, and it seems alarming and senseless to me as a clergyman that we would take a step such as opening a gun shop in this town at a time when the bloodshed level is rising. I think what we need is a spirit of reconciliation about this subject, and that should be an alliance among us all to work hard to ban large-scale magazines on weapons, to eliminate assault weapons, to have a very strict licensing and grandfathering of licensing so that all guns are registered and known about, and so that the chief and his force are not vulnerable to the next crazy attack. There is a relationship between the rising tide of violence and the arrival of a gun shop in this town. Thank you.
Thank you. Hans Janssen, and followed by Stephen Mills.
Last name, Hans Josens. And thank you for having us, having this opportunity for us to speak. I'd like to say, reiterate the question, what is the purpose of a moratorium on gun stores in particular? I feel that it would be more appropriate for the town to allow for a public comment period prior to gun store opening. And in order to be fair, it should be across the board for any new business. Why single out one business or one type of business? Gun stores are the most highly regulated small business in the country. At the local, state, and federal level, highly regulated. Land use zones, perhaps that might be considered, but again, for more than just gun stores. There are auto repair shops literally right next door that do extensive repair on cars that involve a lot of hazardous chemicals, all sorts of hazardous situations that should be also looked at. Conditional use permit, perhaps that also might be appropriate, but again, for more than just gun stores. Not just auto repair, but let's see, restricting non-collector home occupations, I think that's completely out of line. Police permit process, I think, again, that's completely out of line. ID checks for ammo, that's being looked at the federal and state level, and perhaps that might be something that you should leave to the federal and state authorities. Requiring reporting lost and stolen firearms, again, that's being looked at the state and federal level. Perhaps we ought to leave that to the state and federal authorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Stephen Mills, to be followed by Robert Shackelford.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. My name is Stephen Mills. I've been following this controversy in the newspaper and online, and frankly, I don't know what the brouhaha is all about. What is it exactly that you're afraid of? I mean, are you afraid that if you have one or more gun stores in Los Gatos, it's going to stimulate demand for guns among the citizens such that they run out and buy guns? Or are you afraid that, you talk about not citing a gun store near a school. Do you realize that right across the street here, the bicycle store was a gun store? That was Wildcat Sports. I bought a .22 rifle there in 1968. It's a stone's throw away from the high school. Never had a single bit of problem. I mean, what exactly are you afraid of? Are you afraid that some kid walking home from school is going to be kidnapped and taught to shoot, and then he's going to buy guns and ammo for the rest of his life? Actually, that's not too far from the truth. I learned to shoot when I was on the rifle team at Saratoga High School, part of the Los Gatos Saratoga Unified High School District. My friends and I would load our guns in the car. We'd drive down to South 10th Street in San Jose. We'd shoot at the range that was owned and operated by the city of San Jose. I understand that the events in Newtown are a horror, an absolute horror, and every parent just quails at the thought. But the ordinances that you've proposed will do nothing to alleviate it. All they'll do is make it more difficult for legitimate gun owners to buy guns. Let me close with one quick story. A while back, I lived in the city of Sacramento, and one night my wife was lying in bed asleep next to me. My little babe infant daughter was in a bassinet. And at 2 a.m., I looked out the window, and there was a man standing right outside my bedroom window. I grabbed my gun, I turned on the light, I pointed the gun at him, and he ran. I don't know what I would have done without that gun.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.
Robert Shackelford, who will be followed by Michael McLively.
Good evening, Council. The list you had on the overhead is almost a carbon copy, word for word, of what has appeared at the City of Sunnyvale Town Council, as well as the Town of Sacramento, and so on and so on. I would like to ask that from now on in the future that the Town Council of the Town of Los Gatos try to come up with their own original ideas rather than carbon copying something from elsewhere. Having said that, I want to point out that this country is founded on basic ideas of liberty, acquisition of property, self-defense, free association, freedom of the press, and so on. And your job as either legislators or council members, your job is to promote liberty. To answer that question, what can I do through the zoning, through the codes, to help people do what they do best? Everything on there is a limitation, a desire to ban, a desire to pick or choose winners. You don't do that in an open, free society and an open and free market. That's done elsewhere in the world. So I'm going to ask you to think about that for a second. What is your job? To promote liberty or do something otherwise? What you have up there does not promote liberty. It goes against it. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael McLively, who will be followed by Rob Houston.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here tonight. My name is Michael McLively, and I'm from the Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence. The Law Center is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that was founded in San Francisco in the early 90s in response to an assault weapon massacre that occurred there. Since that time, we have worked hand in hand with local governments across the United States in an effort to prevent gun violence and enact laws to prevent gun violence. I'm here to briefly address the issue of local governments regulating firearms dealers. This is an area where local government can actually make a great deal of difference, and that is because both federal and state resources to regulate this area are extremely limited. There are statistics that show that a firearms dealer can expect to be investigated by the ATF only once every 17 years. California alone has over 2,000 dealers, and it's simply too many for the Department of Justice in California to be able to do an effective job enforcing the laws that currently exist. So in a letter that I sent to you all last week addressing this very issue, I've attached the Law Center's model law for local governments in regulating firearms dealers. I suggest that you use that as a resource, as a starting point and a framework in coming up with ideas for common sense, effective regulations. Very quickly, some of the ideas that are in our model law include police permitting and inspections of sites to ensure that they're safe, employee background checks, requiring stores to carry liability insurance. These are common sense regulations that are not prohibited by the Second Amendment. They are not prohibited by state law. They are laws that will help keep this community safe. It's completely within your power to enact them, and we encourage you to call on us if you need additional resources. Thank you.
Thank you. Rob Houston and then Paul Pastrone.
Good evening, Council. My name is Rob Houston. I'm a Los Gatos resident for over 22 years. I'm not political in any way, but this controversy has really stirred me to come out and take some action. I am a proponent of small business. I don't like it when governments limit any kind of business. I think Templar's been singled out, and I think that your decisions to to put some kind of emergency moratorium in is misguided. I think it's done out of fear. I would really like to see you do nothing on this. Let them either succeed or fail. And if other businesses want to come in and try it, let them do it as well. It's good for the town of Los Gatos. It's tax revenue. It's not hurting anybody. It's permitted. I just think that that Templar is getting a bad rap here, and it bothers me. So anyways, thank you.
Thank you. Paul Pastroni, who will be followed by Robert Cobes.
Hello, I'm Paul Pastroni. I'm a Los Gatos resident, born and raised. Went to Dave's Avenue School, I went to Fisher School, and I played at Oak Meadow Park for most of my upbringing. So I've been listening to the issue and hearing speakers, I guess, complain in a way, almost lament that gun stores are highly regulated, and also that make the comparison that there are auto shops near Templar Sports, et cetera, and that cars can kill people. And I think that's pretty disingenuous. I think the reason we're here talking about guns in Los Gatos is because guns are designed, to kill things, animals, hunting, as well as people. And I guess the issue that I think you're focused on around land use, and specifically the proximity to schools and parks in our community, is actually the issue at stake. I'm a big fan of Big Five Sporting Goods. Been there all my life to buy camping equipment. I go in there with my boy. There are guns there. We talk about hunting. That's okay. High-capacity magazines, assault weapons within close proximity to where my kids go to school. The off chance that some crazy could walk in, stock up, and unload at school is just not something that I'm willing to consider as I move around town. So I think if you can move these businesses away from the proximity where our children frequent, so they're not walking by them, on their way to get some beef jerky, I think that's absolutely the thing to focus on. It's not the issue of hunting equipment, camping equipment, sports equipment. It's the issue of proximity to our schools and the potential damage, irreparable damage that this could cause in the wrong hands.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Robert, looks like Cobes, followed by Ron Fink.
Madam Mayor and council members, thank you. As the gentleman before me indicated so eloquently, it's really up to the marketplace to determine the success or failure of Templar. I agree with him in his analysis that let competition prevail. Moreover, any restriction on the legal business at hand, I think it does a detriment not only to the business itself and to the opportunities for people to be entrepreneurs and to be successful, again, determined by the marketplace. It sets a very cold and onerous tone for everybody else in the environment that such a decision would be made. What I would recommend and encourage is that all the items that were listed in the slide on the wall a little while ago be researched so that there is clear efficacy in those items that are proposed, rather than just a potential for, it seems like a good piece of legislation because I think I'll be safe. I'm a psychologist by training, and we call something that is an irrational fear a phobia, and those things can indeed be treated. And unfortunately, we've seen a lot of hysteria and a lot of phobic behaviors. And let's look at this rationally so that we can see what really needs to be done to affect a good business within the community. As the other gentleman said, we have an opportunity for increased tax revenues. The people who rent the buildings get increased rental revenues. The people who are employed by these organizations live and work in this community and pay taxes to this community. The patrons of these businesses also patronize other businesses within the community. And so therefore, council members, I would strongly encourage you to seriously consider if these items that you are considering for an emergency moratorium truly are relevant and truly will have a significant impact. Thank you.
Thank you. Ron Fink, and then David Smith.
Madam Mayor, thank you very much for this opportunity. Council members, I've got to take my hat off to you. I was at the last two meetings, and we know the first meeting was long. So for indulging everybody, I appreciate that on behalf of everybody here. And I know it's a very, very sensitive issue. I've been in this town for 73 years, been looking after a small business for over half a century, and I understand the business is important. And what I don't understand is, especially this moratorium incident, I'm looking, when I was a child, there was 3 gun stores, sport shops, the Wildcat, Coast to Coast, and the Sportsman. And we had no problem. It seems like today it's a people problem and not a gun problem. I took guns to school on the school bus. I gave talks about assault weapons from the Civil War. My neighbor did the same thing with a Colt that was supposedly belonged to Grant. It didn't, obviously, but in the 6th grade, he took a gun to school in a shoebox with the permission of the bus driver, took it into the school, Lois Habersott 6th grade, right over at University Avenue, and everything was fine. There was never a problem. So you would have to think, what has changed here? And it seems to me it's not the guns, it's the people. And those were assault weapons of their time, just like the colonists had the finest assault weapons, else we wouldn't be here. Guns are a part of our whole society. So you just take a hard look at the whole picture. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. David Smith, and then Alberta Brealey.
Well, I appreciate having the choice to do business with Templar Sports, and I, on my lunch hour, walked in and bought some ammo that I found would function in my shotgun, and the brand that I had bought at the other store that people would like me to shop at on Camden Avenue hadn't. So there is a value in choice. As far as the radius from a school or a park or a church, or as some people were saying at the earlier meeting that they're afraid to see a building like that along the road that they drive their children to and from school. The other store on Camden Avenue is within 200 yards of a music school and a church. I don't think people are screaming at that. There's a 10-day wait. People do not walk out and do an impulse buy to shoot up the place. I don't like people being treated as criminals who are not in the business of fingerprinting. There are 20,000 gun laws in the United States, and this is just part of the continuing effort to throw as many strings around Gulliver as possible until he can't move, either from the expense that only the rich can go hunting, or the fact that ignorance of the law is no excuse, and there are just so many laws in existence and being proposed that the person can't invoke the principle of if you don't have any bad intentions, you must be okay, because you can be a felon and not even realize it. And so I would suggest that you operate by the principle of when in doubt, choose the side of liberty. Thank you.
Thank you. Alberta Brierley, followed by Lori Pastroni.
Mayor, Council, thank you. I'm Alberta Brierley of San Jose. I fully support Templar Sports for 2 very basic reasons. This is America, and the U.S. Constitution guarantees our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The gentlemen owners of Templar Sports are pursuing their right to open a revenue-generating business to serve your community. The second reason I support them is because law-abiding gun owners are no threat to your life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. It's criminals who are the threat. And it's a proven fact that the more good citizens who possess firearms, the lower the rate of violent crimes committed. And that is a good thing. Please support this shop, remembering the U.S. Constitution. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to step up here tonight. I moved to Los Gatos about 2 years ago, and I had spent 11 years in the city of London where I was raising my children. And as my husband mentioned earlier, we moved here because he had grown up here, and we felt it was a very, very safe place to raise our children. And we still feel that way. And we're not here to try to change how business is done or try to change the revenue stream to the town. But when we came to the United States, my children began asking us why there was so much gun violence in this country that they had never observed in London and never heard about when they lived in Europe. And we have done our best to try to help them understand that, and no one, and certainly not us, we're not trying to take away anyone's freedom of having a firearm. But we did move to this town, and we pay taxes in this town to have our children as safe as possible. And I know there are no promises, but both of my children are within blocks of this establishment, and we don't feel that the positioning of it is fair to any of the children. And what I have sensed in these meetings is that there are a lot of people fighting for this shop who either don't live in the town or who don't have children in the schools that are within walking distance of Templar. And I don't know if it's appropriate, but I'd love to ask for a showing of hands of who has children in either Fisher Middle School or Dave's Avenue. Is that appropriate?
At this point, no. We're just asking you to talk to us. Thank you.
Okay. Well, that's all. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, Henry Fee and then Amy Goldsmith.
Good evening. I thought the reference to Gulliver's Travels was excellent because I feel like one of those little midgets trying to throw a rope over that giant, the NRA, to get his attention. Because basically, we're not going to change any of the firearm homicide statistics by what we do in a closed community of a few thousand people. But it could be the start of a grassroots movement that could change what happens in those statistics over years. And basically, the elephant in this room is not the Second Amendment. It's not sports hunting and target hunting. It's not self-defense with a single-chambered weapon. The elephant in the room are the semi-automatic rifles with the multiple round magazines. And Feinstein has spent the last 20 years of her professional career looking at this data, trying to sort out the issues. She was able to pass a very effective bill that lasted for 10 years. The people who feel that there's not good data showing that restriction of firearms affects homicides are not familiar with her report. Because basically, the number of assaults with semi-automatics during that 10-year period fell linearly. The number of criminals that were captured with semi-automatic weapons is much less during that 10-year period than it was the 10 years afterwards. And so I would move that we start a grassroots movement, that we look at, incidentally, one quick thing. I reviewed 3 times the last tape from the meeting when the council received their instructions, and when the mayor came back from her break, she instructed the council to look at the Lafayette Protocol and the amateurization of the ordinances, and yet I saw nothing from Mr. Larson about that charge that he was given. So I would like the Bill 150 in the federal government to be the basis of some of our ordinance.
Thank you. Amy Goldsmith and then Lisa Mamel.
Good evening, Council. Thank you, Amy Goldsmith here, Los Gatos resident. Thank you for holding this meeting and the prior ones. I am here to say that I am grateful that you're considering the moratorium so that this issue can be looked at. I feel like there would probably be, those of us who have strong feelings about it would probably feel better if this debate had happened before Templar opened rather than now, and then that might make some people feel less like it was being unfair to Templar that we're considering it now. But I think it is definitely something I am grateful that you're considering. And I think that the tide in the country is moving that way too. I would very much like Los Gatos to be known for nonviolence, for prevention of gun violence, rather than for armaments. And I am grateful to have a voice back again, because I felt very much like their arrival in town and the long period between which they informed the police chief and the town manager and you found out it. I felt like we lost our voice and our opportunity to be heard on this topic at all, whatever the outcome. And thank you for giving us back that voice.
Lisa Mamel and then Stephen Schoenfeld.
Good evening. My name is Lisa Mamel. I think that the issue before us tonight is more than firearms. It's trust. Each of you is held to uphold the public trust. The city manager, the attorney, the chief of police, the town council. Trust has been perhaps broken. At least it's been put into question here. So I think that the moratorium is an attempt and a way that we can get that trust back on a stable footing, to allow for review and deliberation of potential ordinances. I'm an optimist. Trust has been put into question, but it can be repaired. Past the urgency ordinance, through the introduction of ordinances and the study of the ordinances based on tried and true ordinances of Los Gatos neighbors, Campbell, Lafayette, Richmond, San Francisco, they've all been provided as examples. They have all implemented ordinances that are ready for adoption, ones that have been founded on solid research, address real problems in our real backyard and here, and have withstood challenge and scrutiny. The Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence has also offered models. They're willing to help assist drafting for free. They're willing to consult for free. Take up those ordinances that have been listed in the submissions that fulfill or that cover permits and applications, regulations of existing firearms dealers locations, liability, insurance, and indemnification of our town, on-site security, inventory and sales reports, ammunition sales, licensee and employee background checks. This is your chance to repair the trust. One good step is to pass this temporary ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen Schoenfeld and then Nayan McNeil.
Madam Mayor and council members, my name is Steve Schoenfeld. I've lived here in Los Gatos for about 50 years. I'm a Vietnam vet, and I fought for your right to be up here and enjoy this freedom that you have, that you may take away the rights of others to purchase a tool. A firearm is nothing more than a tool. That tool can be used for good or bad. And it has always been used more for good than bad. We hear about the few bad things that happen. The police have firearms. That's good. There's all these citizens that'll go to this store. They have to jump through hoops to get firearms. I've done it myself. And they don't want to lose that right. If they don't follow the rules, they lose their license and their livelihood. They will follow the rules. So you don't have to put this moratorium on. So I would like to ask you to please vote against this moratorium. It's not good for us. It's not good for Los Gatos. Thank you.
Thank you. Nayan McNeil and then Harry Schoenfeld. Although I swear I heard that name before. Nayan McNeil.
Thank you very much, Nayan McNeil. Since we're all saying how long we've lived in Los Gatos, I've lived here, 52 years. Does that give me any kind of ranking? I came here to ask you to pass this moratorium because I believe it's important for the town to open up the opportunity for citizens to know what's going on and to have a chance to review what, in fact, has gone on in private. I'm interested in the man right before me now, however, who talks about good and bad, and I'm trying to think of something good that a gun can do, and I can't think of anything because it's designed to do destructive things, to kill or to injure or to put a hole in some building or something. But I'm perfectly willing to talk to him at the break and find out something good that a gun can do. And the police, of course, have them because they have bad things happen to them and they need a gun to protect themselves, but they don't intend to do something good with it. I'm surprised also that people are amazed that we're having this conversation when it's legal to own a gun. Of course, it has been legal to own a gun. But all across the country, they're having this conversation, and I'm delighted to know that because the world has changed, the environment has changed, the way in which people are dealing with guns and with gun violence has changed. We are not living in 1776. We are living now, and the world has changed. We're not talking about single-shot rifles that the Constitution mentions. We're talking about a country that is facing lots and lots of violence. It is possible for a country to change its mind about how things operate. The Constitution also tells us to allow slavery, to give no votes to women, but we change our minds about things. And I think it's time that we changed our minds about a free, open opportunity for anyone to buy guns. You don't have to just not be a criminal. You need to be really circumspect about this. Please pass the moratorium.
Thank you. Harry Schoenfeld and then Jeff Klopotik.
Good evening, members of the council. My name is Harry Schoenfeld. Thomas Jefferson stated very clearly that the basic reason for the Second Amendment is to protect the citizen from tyranny in government. This is truly an example of tyranny in government. Think about it for a minute, how ridiculous this issue is. People die and are maimed riding bicycles. Are you going to close stores that sell bicycles? Kids are injured and sometimes injured very seriously riding skateboards. You're going to close down businesses that sell skateboards? Ridiculous. You know, my wife and I have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars over the last 47 years we've been in this community. And if you tell me that I can't buy a gun in this community, I think we'll stop purchasing other items in this community, food services, articles, just anything up and down Main Street. We can go to some other city that thinks differently than what you're proposing here. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff Klopotik and then Jess Guy.
Good evening. My name's Jeff Klopotik. I'm a resident of Saratoga. And at the first meeting I spoke and I mentioned about how I had traveled prior to coming to Los Gatos where I had lived. I was a resident here for a while too. And that in my travels that I lived in areas that were pro-gun or generally favorable to gun ownership and those that were anti-gun, those that were hostile to firearms ownership. And examples included Chicago, notably hostile, Washington, D.C., but then again places like Aurora and Newtown that were also hostile to firearms ownership. And one of the things that pretty much categorizes or those areas is that they usually have some very spectacular crimes of which we are all very much aware. I'd like to add one more town to that list, Santa Cruz. At the time that we were having this discussion, Santa Cruz had recently passed a moratorium on the gun store that was there, and I would basically categorize that as an anti-gun action. And not more than a month later, we have 2 dead police. Why does this happen? I can't really say why. I don't know if the criminal element senses weakness or if they smell the fear. But I'll leave the causation to the experts, but we can't ignore the lesson that we have from Santa Cruz. I would ask you to please consider not passing the moratorium. Don't force the operating agreement or other legislation that would be hostile to them based on their dealings with firearms. Please tell Templar Sports that they are welcome in Los Gatos.
Thank you. Jess Guy, followed by Darren Baker.
Thank you for having this meeting again in ad nauseum, I think. Before I start with my 2 minutes, I would like to send some kudos out to Vice Mayor Leonardis. Over the weekend, I was tasked to help the sheriff and the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors in their gun turn-in. Now, my politics on that aside, I was pleased to see the vice mayor there as more than just a photo op. He actually came out, talked to people, even me, and paid attention to what was going on. And that speaks highly, and I do appreciate that. We may not ever agree, but I have respect for you now, sir, more than I had last time. So, anyway, that's the carrot, now the stick. The moratorium has got to be based on something pretty specific. We can't just say graffiti, litter, and vandalism. You know, if that were the case, we'd shut down all of the overpasses on the freeway. You've got to come up with something specific. You've got to be able to identify health, safety, welfare in the community in order to justify this. And I don't think you can. I don't think you can do it honestly. I don't think you can do it thoughtfully. Those are things that you have to look at before you do this. If you're using zoning as some kind of a smokescreen to have a moratorium, that's false. That's not transparent. Let's come out and be honest about it. Everybody talking tonight has said it's gun control, and that's basically what we're talking about. Fear of guns, hatred of guns, those types of things. There are 2 reports here that have been talked about from the town manager. I would challenge some of the whereases, some of the identifying aspects of some of these issues are basically fallacious. And I would take a good look at the whereas, and say, this isn't right. Thank you.
Thank you. Darren Baker and then Bonnie Williams.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. So I'm here to support Templar Sports this evening. I have been coming to Los Gatos since 1986 when I could first start to drive. And I have spent money in your town. I've enjoyed doing that at many of the venues here. I went into Templar Sports for the first time just this afternoon. I thought it was very well organized, very clean, nice looking store. Looks very safe. And I think that it will be an asset to have that business in your town. I look forward to doing business with them. Any hostility towards Templar Sports, and I will seriously have to reconsider spending any of my hard-earned dollars in your town. And I don't want to do that. I would really encourage people to separate emotions from facts. This is a very emotionally based issue, and that just does not work in the interests of freedom. I have lived in a country that is essentially gun-free. I lived in Japan for 2 years. I know what it's like to live in a country that is very safe. However, they face very different social issues than we do. The social issues that are at the root of violence in this country are not being addressed properly. Things like moratoriums and ordinances are nothing more than feel-good measures, possibly done out of political correctness, and they will do nothing to curb violence. Thank you.
Thank you. Bonnie Williams and then Vince.
Bonnie Williams, I'm a Los Gatos resident. Thank you for your time. We're going crazy over this being the 3rd time we had to be up here. We should not infringe on any legal businesses. Again, their sales bring in 1% of their sales. The sales tax collected by them, 1% comes back to our town that we get to use to all our benefits. We got to get over this fear of guns. You need to fear things. I mean, are we going to start eliminating knives and hammers? I mean, that kills a lot of people too. You need to worry about car bombs hitting your schools. I'm not worried about one loon of a shotgun of somebody, or even if he had 10 rounds in his gun. You know, if you want to worry about mass murders in this town being safe, you're going to have to worry about car bombs. So you're going to have to eliminate fertilizer being sold in our town, too. As far as, again, the Second Amendment has a lot to do with this. We are worried about tyranny. Ask the Jews and the Polish people in World War II when they started giving up their guns. What do they think about that now? Many people died because they gave up their guns. They had nothing to fight with. Look at the Middle East. Look at Syria. They fight with rocks. Why are they fighting with rocks? Their guns are gone. They can't fight tyranny. Get over this emotional BS, because tyranny is what it's all about in the Second Amendment.
Before the next speaker, I'm going to ask you, this is the first time and the only time. There are a lot of people who are very articulate. You may agree with some, you may disagree with some. But I'm asking no clapping. Let's get through this hearing. If clapping happens one more time, I will have no choice but to clear the chambers. I would prefer to have all of you here with us rather than on the other side of those doors. I think we are at Vince Mondry.
Vince Mondry, yes. Thank you, Mayor and City
Then
Council and
Maggie
Los
Creighton.
Gatos for the opportunity to speak. I'm a Vietnam veteran, and I'm not very happy what we did to that small country. I'm kind of ashamed of it. And basically, I look at my country a lot differently since then. I fear my government. I look at most of the people, they live in fear anyway. I have a couple notes here. Let me get to them here. Templar Arms is probably the minimum thing you have to worry about. Yeah, we have to worry about the national debt that we're running up, all this entitlements and stuff like that. Our country's in big trouble, and Templar Arms probably need to be there when things fall apart. We go to martial law or whatever. Probably going to be happy we have them around here. I had my sister and her husband were living in the Bay Area over here, and one evening their house was broken in and they were beat up. They had a wrong address. They're looking for drugs. You know, that's what I'm saying. I would love to have them have something to protect themselves with. You know, it's just crazy. Anyway, I think the moratorium is. Why am I here fighting for a constitutional guaranteed right that we shouldn't have to even question? People that feel guilty about the Second Amendment, that they got to feel good, something they got to pass here to take my rights away from me. This is a split issue. There are half people for it, half people against it. What gives them the right to take my freedom away from me? It's my question to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Maggie Creighton and then Dave Walker.
Hi, I'm Maggie Creighton, and I've lived in Los Gatos 40 plus years. I love this place. I want it to be safe. I want people to have their rights also. However, I really commend, I should say, the council and the mayor on having this meeting, because we really need to talk it out. We need to talk the issues. We need to talk whether it's safe, whatever. But we need this meeting. Thank you. I also work with Anna Eshoo. She's a member of the House of Representatives, Congress of the United States. I let Anna know what was going on here in Los Gatos. Anna sent me a letter, and I want you to know what's going on at the federal level and what's going on with Anna and Dianne Feinstein and how hard they are working to be fair, but to protect all the citizens and the kids and everybody and the grandmas of the United States from gun violence. Dear Maggie, thank you for your letter regarding Templar Sports in Los Gatos and for sharing your concerns with me about the opening of a firearms dealer in the community. As you may know, I've vigorously supported measures to reduce gun violence in our country for over 3 decades. I voted for the original assault weapons ban that was in place from 1994 to 2004 and fought unsuccessfully to renew it. I'm now a co-sponsor of Senator Feinstein's bill to reinstate a strengthened version of this legislation. I'm also a co-sponsor of the Large Capacity Ammunition Feeding Device Act and Stop Online Ammunition Sales Act, which would ban the large ammunition magazines frequently used in mass shootings and prohibit online sales of ammunition, respectively. What I wanted to read
All right,
this
Maggie,
tweet-
thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity.
Dave Walker, followed by Steve Cohen.
City Council, I very much appreciate being here today. I'm a two-tour combat vet, disabled vet. Got some body parts missing, but doing good for that. We said a Pledge of Allegiance here tonight. I think everybody said the pledge, and in it, we ended with liberty and justice for all. Do we really mean it, or do we just recite it by rote? Is it something we do just by feel, or do we, what is it? I don't know. My wife and my son asked me, why are you coming here tonight? Because we live in Campbell. I said, you know what? I traveled halfway around the world to fight for the freedoms of other people. I lost my buddies in combat. I've seen the grief and the misery that comes from it. I was part of a transition team in my years after transitioning severely wounded out of Afghanistan and Iraq. I know the price that we pay for freedom. If you are going to give away your freedoms, God help you. God help you all. Think carefully about what you're doing. I also know that, I did over 21 years in law enforcement. I was on a critical incident team. I know that people can do ugly things to one another, but they don't need a gun to do it. I've seen men disembowel themselves to try to kill themselves. They couldn't get a gun. I've seen things that no person should have to see. But one of the things I thought about tonight, when 9/11 happened, I was part of an extraction crew. I was pulling bodies out of the World Trade Center towers, and the acts that perpetrated that were not guns. They were box cutters. Think about what you're doing. The guns, smoke and mirror. Think about your rights. Don't give it up. Look at history. Look at what happens. I appreciate being here. I hope you listen to what I've had to say. Thank you.
Steve Kwan, followed by Scott.
Mayor Spector, members of the City Council. The whole nation was traumatized by what transpired in Connecticut and in Colorado. But I think that a lot of people, including citizens of this community, made a rush to judgment and are using Templar Sports as a scapegoat because it so happens to sell firearms. Templar Sports had nothing to do, of course, with the incidents in Colorado and Connecticut. And I just wish to say that I'm against this moratorium. There's also another thing that concerns me, in that I was told that there was some research done as to whether or not if a store such as Templar Sports could be closed down as a nuisance because certain third parties were vandalizing or putting graffiti around the surrounding premises and leaving garbage. But even though, okay, that ordinance may be used to try to close them down, I want to point out that under English common law, there was, which we have based our laws upon, there was another doctrine called equity. And what equity was that even though the laws may point toward doing something, if it's rendered unfair or unjust under the principles of equity, that law should not be enforced. So therefore, I hope that Los Gatos doesn't use the law, the nuisance law, to shut down Templar Sports based upon principles of equity. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. Scott, and then looks like Rob Hagee.
Mayor Spector, members of the council. I live in Los Gatos. I've lived here for 9 years. Let's pretend that a new local newspaper starts up in Los Gatos, and for some reason they decide to print articles that are very controversial. I'm not talking about obscenity. I'm not talking about libel. The articles they're printing are just controversial. Let's further pretend that 200 angry Los Gatos residents sign a petition asking you to do something about this newspaper. Would you then have town staff write up an urgency ordinance that forbids any new newspaper to start up in Los Gatos over the next 45 days? Or would you pass an ordinance that permits new newspapers to only buy 1 gallon of ink per year? Of course you wouldn't. And the reason you wouldn't is because it would violate the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. The urgency ordinance you have before you tonight is a violation of the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. The proponents of this ordinance have cited some U.S. Supreme Court and other court decisions to prove that this ordinance is legal. Just because some courts have ruled an ordinance is, or law is legal does not make it constitutional. For example, in the Dred Scott case, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that African Americans are not U.S. citizens. Does anyone in this room support that opinion? I doubt that anyone in this room thinks that the Dred Scott opinion by the U.S. Supreme Court was constitutional. If you vote in favor of this ordinance, you are making it more difficult for me to exercise my Second Amendment right to purchase the guns, ammunition, and gun accessories that are necessary for me to exercise my constitutional right to keep and bear arms. Please do not violate my constitutional rights. Mayor Spector, members of the council, please vote no on this urgency ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Rob Hagee and then John Fitzgibbon.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. My name is Rob Hagee. No, I don't live in Los Gatos, but I did purchase a Crown Victoria when you still had Los Gatos Ford here. So. And I have eaten many times in your fair city. I was a Boy Scout. This is about liberty and facts. I was a Boy Scout. I was in the ROTC. I'm a veteran, retired law enforcement. I'm a firearms instructor, and I'm also the father and I'm grandfather of 2 6-year-old twins who I just saw this weekend for their birthday. It very much would upset me if anything was to ever happen to them, okay? But let's get to some facts, okay? First off, Kamala Harris, our Attorney General, will not arrest 40,000 known felons. She knows who they are. Will not send out the police to arrest them, okay? Now, you want to feel good and make some, moratorium. Well, I'm sorry. Politicians, want to make feel good, but this is, more about facts. 70% of the shooters involved in all shootings are felons. They're already against the law. California is now reducing the prison population, which I started my career in law enforcement at San Quentin, okay? None of them people are very nice, okay? So I'm trying to get to you people, also the chief of police sitting over there, and he knows the Supreme Court does not require him to protect any of you at any time. That is a court case. And those 2 cops that died in Santa Cruz, because many a time I knocked on doors in San Francisco knowing there's a felon behind there. And the same thing could have happened to me. So I do understand what firearms can do. Thank you.
Thank you. John Fitzgibbon and then Woodrow Johnston.
Good evening and thank you. I'd like to read something that was passed by the Los Gatos Town Council nearly 10 years ago, St. Patty's Day 2003, and I'll quote from it. The town of Los Gatos, and I quote, affirms its commitment to embody democracy and to embrace, defend, and uphold the inalienable rights and fundamental liberties granted under the United States Constitution and the Constitution of the State of California. The Supreme Court in both Heller and McDonald have held that the right to keep and bear arms is an individual right, and it's been so incorporated to the states. So a citizen of Los Gatos can have a gun, but you're proposing that they just can't buy a gun in Los Gatos. That would be an infringement upon their ability to keep and bear. The current resolution that obviously hasn't been proofread does not identify an immediate threat to public health, safety, or welfare. Vague fears, concerns, or just not having enough time does not make a case for immediate threat. The gentleman from San Francisco who was up here earlier offering donation of his time stated that the federal government has just not the time, I suppose, in Joe Biden's words, to enforce its laws. In fact, of 72,000 background check denials, there were less than 50 prosecutions. And the state of California does not have the ability to enforce its laws. So, since those things don't work, let's just add another layer on top of it that also won't work, and let's not attack the real causes of violence in our society. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Woodrow Johnston and then Vincent Rubino.
Madam Mayor, first I just want to apologize for clapping. You know, we get a little emotional here, and I apologize for clapping when you told us not to. So I had a big, long speech here. I'm a young American. You know, I'm only 21. This is the first time I've actively participated in our democratic republic. I'm going to go ahead and cut it down for you guys because I'm sure a lot of it you've already heard. I'm just going to put up an idea I had. When I was a child in elementary school, there were often toys available for all to enjoy. Sometimes kids would abuse this privilege. On one occasion, a child would take something like a basketball and throw it at other kids. As a result, when something like this happened, the offending toy was confiscated from everyone. The school staff, which our parents trusted, felt this was the appropriate way to discipline the student body and prevent further incidents. There's a problem with this. I call this a schoolyard mentality. While it may or may not be appropriate for kids, we aren't kids. We're full adults. We're full citizens with full rights. And what makes this even less effective is I can just go down to Scotts Valley and buy a gun. Or a criminal, which is more likely, will just buy a gun from someone's trunk. So Los Gatos or any other government entity are not our parents. They're not our teachers. They exist. You exist because we allow you to. You exist to protect our rights and protect the quiet enjoyment of those rights. And this moratorium, which is not due process, you can only take away someone's rights with due process. If you want to take away our rights, let's go to court. But this legislation is not due process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Vincent Rubino and then Chris Giangreco.
Hello, my name is Vincent Rubino. Thank you for having this meeting again tonight. I'm a 15-year resident of Los Gatos, and my sons walk by Templar Sports every day to school. This has made me think about issues such as how guns are involved in my life. So I took a moment to reflect on my life and how guns have been involved at various points. I've taken my sons target shooting. I have shot trap and skeet, had a good time with that. I've gone out with my friends shooting. I know I was also assaulted in high school because I was wearing the wrong jacket in the wrong part of town. I know I would have liked a gun at the time. I think probably 2 years later, not such a good idea. 20 years later, I'm really glad I didn't have access to a gun at the time. My usual poker buddies from high school get together a lot and play poker. One time someone came and visited and played poker with them, and there was a bit of an altercation. He put his gun on the table. Didn't say anything else. You know, it's a tool. It isn't actually being used to kill anyone, but it's a tool, and it is being used like that. He didn't get invited back, fortunately. Finally, another friend in high school, was killed by a gun, his own. He took his own life. It was unfortunate. And then finally, someone who I knew in junior high was killed by his father with a shotgun because he was climbing in. It's a tragedy. It happens. A lot of bad things happen with guns, even from people who are good. We don't need a gun. We don't need any more guns in this town. We don't need a gun shop. We don't need more ammunition. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Giangreco and then Martha Stern.
Hi, my name is Chris Giangreco. I came into town here for this meeting. I visited Templar Sports on the way in. I found it to be the most professional looking gun shop that I've been into in the last number of years. The last time I was in this town, I drove down University, up and down it. I could not find the store. It's definitely not an in-your-face store. I couldn't even find it when I was looking for it until after I spoke to some people and they told me exactly where it was. It's a great looking store. Now, I have a lot of trouble understanding why this moratorium is being put forth. And one of the reasons why I'm here is to speak my mind about people feeling like local governments overstep their bounds and put restrictions on businesses or people, restricting people's rights to do what they feel they need to do. Now, I'm not the greatest public speaker, but you know, I see that this moratorium, it's not going to do you any good in preventing any gun violence, you know, and it may have a negative effect on your community in that, you know, if this moratorium exists, I'll be tempted to only spend my dollars in Los Gatos at the DMV and at Templar Sports. I ate dinner, I spent some money here tonight. I won't come to Los Gatos to spend my dollars, I'll just drive right through, I'll vote with my wallet. And I think there's many other people in surrounding communities that will feel the same way for your feel-good efforts, which will be futile in solving the violence issue, if that's what this issue is really about.
Thank you. Martha Stern and then Eric Royce.
Good evening. My name is Martha Stern, and I'm a resident of Los Gatos. I mentioned that I'm a resident of Los Gatos because I think this is a resident issue. We're not discussing banning firearms across the state, across the country. You know, it's very clear Americans love their Second Amendment and love their firearms. And the reason I think we're having this discussion is because clearly California and federal laws aren't enough. You look in the paper every day and you see multiple examples of where, you know, something went wrong. Gun got in the wrong hands by, you know, the wrong person, and by having a firearms store in Los Gatos, you know, we're adding to the proliferation of firearms on the streets. There isn't a lot that we as citizens and residents of the town can do, or you as the town council can do. The only thing you can do to tackle this problem is to, you know, restrict the sale of firearms in this town. That's all we can do. We can't touch Campbell or anywhere else. So, in short, I'm saying I support the moratorium, and I appreciate your time, you know, hearing the side of my point. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric Royce and then William Scott.
Good evening, Mayor. In 1943, my father made a decision to lawfully and legitimately take advantage of a promise that our nation made in 1868, that he and his children, as well as his grandchildren, could and would become citizens of the United States. He could take advantage of all of the liberties pursuant to the 14th Amendment. Pardon me, I'm kind of nervous. He could also take advantage of the fact that no state could make or enforce any law which could deprive him of his life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor could any state deprive him or his children or his grandchildren the equal protection of the laws. It's very important that when you're making considerations for these so-called moratoriums on gun stores any store, whether it's a gun store or tattoo shop. They tried to do that in Hermosa Beach several years ago. They tried to say no to permitting for a tattoo shop, and the Ninth Circuit Court said, nope, you can't do that. So it's important to take these things into consideration, that we have a due process clause in our 14th Amendment. We have an equal protection clause. If you're going to pass a moratorium on gun stores, on any store, then you also have to pass a moratorium on tattoo shops, skin spas, gyms, anything that might imply an unsafe element. Having said that, I support Templar Sports, and I do not support a moratorium. Thank you.
Thank you. William Scott, and then Eddie Okolov.
Hello. I do not support the moratorium because I believe in the right to bear arms, especially for minority adults. I believe the right to protect yourself and your friends and relatives is a right and a responsibility. I also believe it is the responsibility of every custodial adult, including school teachers and parents. Government discriminating against a business because its opponents may cause trouble is similar to the heckler's veto, a tactic used in the past against oppressed groups. The threat is used as an excuse to restrict a basic adult right and responsibility, and if not unconstitutional or illegal, it's at least unethical. Thank you.
Thank you. Eddie Okolov, and then Mike Varner.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll try to make this quick. It's been really hard for me to sit down there and not blurt anything out or anything with all this misinformation about guns. I'm just sitting there and it's killing me. I just want to say one thing. People have forgot to mention that guns actually do save lives, not just kill. Okay? You can ask your chief over there. Second of all, I think this moratorium is just bad on so many levels. What does it say to future businesses that might want to come here and open a business? Are they going to do that to me or to them? You know, apron tie them so they can't grow their business or do a profitable business here. So anyways, I say please vote no on the moratorium. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike Varner, followed by Michael Glow.
Good evening. My name is Mike Varner. I'm the founder of the local NRA member group in 1994, which is now the Golden State Second Amendment Council. This is an information group, not a shooting club. We inform people of the laws, the responsibilities of ownership, where to shoot, where to get safety training. We were at the gun turn-in at the fairgrounds over the weekend, handing out literature, letting people know their legal options. One person who received that literature decided to sell his guns and not destroy them. That was a Los Gatos resident. When he called me, I told him yes, I would be glad to purchase those from you legally at a dealer. He was going to go to the dealer in Campbell. I told him, you have a dealer in Los Gatos. He chose to give the business to that Los Gatos business, Templar. Currently, there are 2 rescue guns that were saved from destruction at Templar. They will sit there for a waiting period before they can be picked up. Los Gatos will receive the revenue from that purchase. The .22 and the small gauge shotgun that I purchased will be used for training at scouting groups and other youth groups that come to the 10th Street range in San Jose. Firearms are not an issue. It's safety and training. You have an asset with this business. Not only do they bring in revenue, they have offered to provide safety training for adults and children. If you know basic safety rules, firearms are a safe sport. They're a protection for your family and yourself. I ask you not to pass this moratorium. This is a business that is an asset to this city, not a detriment. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Glau, and then William Kashub.
I would have liked to have spoken after hearing all of the staff's recommendations. We only heard a little bit about agenda item number 3. Don't know what happened to 1 and 2. But it would have been nice to know and anticipate what was going to happen before we spoke rather than after. Several speakers at the prior 2 town council meetings have told stories about how about how there have been gun sales and ammunition sales in the past here in Los Gatos. One even tonight related their story of buying a .22 in 1968, 45 years ago. I would bet that .22 was a single bullet chamber model with a bolt action, not an assault weapon, and not being able to use armor-piercing bullets. However, before Templar Armaments came to town, there hadn't been any stores that sold guns or ammunition for many, many years. And why not? Another speaker said, let the market decide. The market had decided. Residents of the town did not demand any guns or ammunition. The gun shop did not open here because there was a sudden demand for these products. Templar will not succeed or fail as a result of the demand for their products from the town residents. Clearly, from the attendees from out of town at these meetings is an indication that their clients are not town residents. They are also going to depend heavily on online business. The NRA's presence and attempt to sway and unduly influence our community is obvious. The latest little jingle from the NRA regarding the only way.
Thank you. William Kashub, then Shannon Susick.
I just want to, I don't have to remind the town council of this, but one of the things that occurred in the last meeting was that the council has chosen to use the issues before you as a land use problem. It's not a Second Amendment problem. And it gets wearisome to continue to hear about the Second Amendment when in fact we're talking about something else. We are talking about a group of citizens who now number in signature, who now number over 500 people who are not happy with the place that Templar is. And that's the only reason that many of us got involved in this. If this was off in some lonely field and not in a neighborhood, okay, it probably wouldn't have bothered any of the 500 people that have already signed on to be against this particular store. Secondly, I'd like to say that as an individual, when I found out the ownership characteristics of Templar, and the fact that a policeman was a part owner, I became very, very uneasy with that. I continue to be uneasy with it. And I will remain uneasy with it, even in the sales that they are doing. And I think it's going to require some special regimen, which is articulated in the document that I sent to all of you. It's going to require a special regimen to make sure that the sales are being done, particularly if they're being done to police departments, that there isn't this sleight of hand where the same thing that are being done for the police departments are being done for individual.
Thank you. Thank you. Shannon Susick, and then Sandy Decker.
Good evening. Madam Mayor and Council, thank you for the opportunity to speak, the privilege actually. It's a historical night for Los Gatos, really is. During the past few weeks, since learning about Templar opening, a small group of people has grown into, and I hate to correct Bill, but several thousand. They're not here. Not everyone can make it, and not everyone chooses to attend meetings. But the initial outcry and concern has not lessened, and the community continues to demand participation, which you are allowing us. Our group supports the moratorium going forward, and the staff. We've provided documents, findings, all kinds of information, and there's more to be found that will be helpful in writing ordinances going forward to protect the health and safety, to adhere to town codes. When I looked at the agenda, I looked at the minutes from the 11th meeting, which is always very exciting for me. And I saw that there was names listed of who spoke in that continuation meeting. There weren't that many people, but Sharon Cunningham's name was listed. But it just said that she spoke in opposition to Templar. It didn't say exactly what she did. So what I've done, and I'd like it in the record, is I have printed out a petition that was signed by over 1,000 people in person and online, the initial one that says I do not support a gun shop in Los Gatos. And I'd like that entered into the record because it doesn't appear to be in there. And then I have a new petition that over 800 people signed since the last meeting supporting the moratorium, so that you know you have the support of over 2,000 people in this community for what you're doing. And thank you very much.
Thank you, and you're going to give those to the clerk? Thank you. Sandy Decker, and then Lainey Richardson.
I'm Sandy Decker, 45 Glen Ridge, Los Gatos. From your swearing in to your State of the Town address, your message has been very clear, Mayor Spector. You've asked us to be involved in our community, to come forward, voice our concerns so that you and council are informed by those of us who are impacted by town decisions. For the last 3 months, well over 2,000 people who live in Los Gatos have done just that, since the doors opened on Templar firearms on a very specious ground that nothing could have prevented it. Having the voice of the community silenced on the issue, with no public hearing, we organized to make sure we wouldn't be silenced through the ongoing process. We're grateful to you that you have allowed us to be a part of the moratorium procedure. We have worked diligently to supply you and council with the most in-depth information you could have on moratorium from across the county, the state, and the nation. Over 20 of us have met regularly to research, report, and write the information you have received in the last 2 weeks. We have been in contact with leaders from all over the United States who are willing to do anything to help communities break away from the stranglehold of the NRA and reduce gun violence in this country. I would like to draw your attention to 2 of our significant statistics. Los Gatos is experiencing a significant increase in gun-related violent crimes, including gun-related homicides and suicides, as well as suspects apprehended with loaded or concealed guns. Los Gatos has the highest per capita suicide rate in Santa Clara County. Most often, these suicides are committed by a firearm in a person's residence, not a statistic we would like to increase by adding more access to guns, especially to at-risk youth. Mayor and Council, you've been given 12 outstanding, well-researched, case-cited findings that we strongly advise you to include in any moratorium language that goes forward tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Lainey Richardson, and then Rob Elwood.
Thank you. I'm Lainey Richardson. I've lived in town since I was 5 years old. While I realize this is a public meeting and the members of the public are allowed their First Amendment right to speak, the commentary from Los Gatos residents should be the primary options that the Town of Los Gatos Council keeps in mind while making decisions. It is our town. We pay the property taxes and vote for our council members to represent our opinions. We pay the police to protect our children and families. And we are here to tell you that we support a moratorium on the sales of firearms, ammunition, and explosive devices in our town. The opinions of residents of other municipalities should be considered by those officials whom they elected and in the cities where they pay taxes. Thank you.
Thank you. Rob Elwood and then Sharon Lorraine.
Hello, I am Rob Elwood. Los Gatos will always be my hometown. Thank you all for allowing us to speak and remind us that the people came first. Then the government was established. This is a simple yet a foundational principle. Small towns are exactly where we started. Whether it is a federal, state, or local government, its limited powers. The Constitution establishes boundaries. The Bill of Rights tells the government some examples of what is off limit to the government. Our rights, our freedoms, our liberties are not given to us. We already had them. We've always had them. Past residents and council members understood this. They did not ban gun stores. It worries me that the council has already made up its mind. A moratorium sounds as if you want to ban gun shops. The town council represents all residents, all opinions, for or against this issue. You need to have a balanced decisions. The town council is to promote town management and town planning, not banning. Thank you.
Thank you. Sharon Lorraine and then David Millett.
Madam Mayor, Council, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak this evening. I would like to speak to the possible moratorium that would disallow law-abiding citizens access to retail firearms and ammunition at Templar Sports. In March of last year, the Department of Homeland Security purchased 450 million hollow point bullets from defense contractors ATK. Hollow point bullets are designed to expand upon impact, causing greater damage to the object being entered. Military use of hollow point bullets is banned under the Geneva Convention because weapons designed to cause unnecessary suffering, where death is also inevitable, is prohibited. This law originated at the Hague Convention of 1899, and the U.S. was a signator to it at the Hague Convention of 1907. The Department of Homeland Security has also ordered another 750 million rounds of different types of ammo in separate solicitation. That includes 357 magazine rounds that are able to penetrate walls. And the DHS has yet to discuss why they are ordering such a massive amount of bullets that cause maximum organ damage. This is an agency that has limited need domestically for doing harm. When you fight wars, you can go through ammunition very rapidly, but the Department of Homeland Security is only supposed to be shooting at people very rarely. If the United States was ever invaded, it would be the job of the U.S. military to defend the country. So what are all those bullets for, and under what conditions does the DHS ever anticipate firing off 450 million rounds? Is that saying I have 25 seconds?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So who does the DHS plan to be shooting at? I am a peace-loving person, just like millions of other law-abiding citizens who own guns. And statistics prove that gun control laws don't stop criminals from getting guns. We've seen history in the first stages of a tyrannical government is that they disarm their citizens. And so I don't support the moratorium. Thank you.
Thank you. David Millett and then Brian Bertuccini.
Hi, and good evening. Dave Millay. I was born at Good Samaritan Hospital. I've lived here in town my entire life. I just want to make that clear. I am a resident of Los Gatos, always have been. I plan to always be. I am also a firearms owner and a supporter of Templar Sports and firearms retail establishments anywhere in this town or any town close to us. I consider them to be a good business model. I consider them to be a responsible ambassador of a sport, a shooting sport. I teach my children responsible firearms handling, storage, and use. That's my job. Your job is to support the town of Los Gatos, generate retail income for the town of Los Gatos in a responsible manner. I consider a firearms retail establishment to be part of that class of business. To approach this, as I have written, the current direction implies a culture of guilty until proven innocent. I really don't understand that line of reasoning. They have rules, regulations, laws, all that are required to be followed in order to operate a reasonable business. Having a police officer on staff would pretty much ensure, to my mind, that this business intends to operate in a very legal manner. You're discussing somebody's career as well as their outside livelihood. I think that every intention to follow the law would be paramount to their success. I appreciate your time. I appreciate a logical approach to this. I do not support a moratorium. I don't understand the reason for it. If the purpose is to save people, it is an impossibility. The source of firearms is all around us. If there is a source of firearms in town, it certainly isn't going to cause a grandiose mass murder because it was purchased here in town. Those weapons are highly regulated, and I don't think we're going to see an increase in crime because of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Brian Bertuccini, then C. Jefferson Stanley.
Mayor and council members, thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I'm from the neighboring community of San Jose. I'm a veteran. I'd served 4 years as an Army Ranger, and one of the things I learned in the service was that you're responsible for your own safety. And now as a father with 2 young daughters, I'm responsible for the safety of my family as well. What I see, and I've been here for the previous 2 meetings, it appears that this is about political correctness. Guns are politically incorrect because they're associated with violence. Nobody likes violence. I don't like violence, and I don't like having to explain that to my children. We hear a lot in the media. We hear a lot from our elected leaders. Less than a month ago, our president signed an executive order. He signed many executive orders around this topic. One of those executive orders was a mandate for stricter enforcement of gun laws. Last Friday, this same president issued 17 presidential pardons. One of those were to a convicted felon who was convicted of 2 crimes, 2 gun crimes. If we can't, someone mentioned trust earlier, if we can't trust our president to set the example and get tough on gun crime, who can we trust? I'm responsible for protecting my family, as many others are. I think if this ordinance goes into place, this moratorium, that there are some potential unintended consequences. For example, who thought that this going into effect would actually give Templar a monopoly on gun sales in Los Gatos? I don't think anybody that signed those petitions thought that. But let me ask you this. I live in San Jose, not far from my house. There was a home invasion robbery. Would you rather walk by Templar, or would you rather walk by the house where that home invasion went down?
Thank you. C. Jeffrey Stanley, and then Benjamin Cogan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Town Council. My name is Jeffrey Stanley. I'm not a resident here, but I hope I have a voice here. I went to elementary school here in Los Gatos. I've been coming here since I was a small child. My mother would take me shopping here. And I know a lot of the people that are here don't live here, but they frequent the establishments here. I know myself and my business has spent well over $1 million in businesses and services in Los Gatos over the last few years. And I think the people that have businesses think I should have a voice here. And I heard a lady talking earlier about fear. And is that what we're really looking at? Is that what really the concern is here? This is a city that has over 50 establishments serving alcohol. At a very young age, I picked up the newspaper and I saw that there was a car accident. It was a day after Easter. A drunk driver killed a family of 3 and a small child. And at that point, I said I would never drink. And because I didn't want to be responsible for something like that. I don't understand alcohol. I don't understand why people drink. But people have that right, and I will defend that right. But this is a city that has over 50 alcohol-related establishments. Across the street from the school, down the street from the school, around the corner from the school. There are more deaths here from alcohol than there are handguns. If you really want to keep this city safe and you want to protect these people, that's what you should look at. It's not guns. And the fear is ignorance. It's not knowing. If you make a decision on this, I ask you that you go to a gun range, see what this is about, talk to these people. They're law-abiding citizens. These aren't the people that you read about. These aren't the people that are going into schools.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, Town Council, thank you.
Benjamin Cogan and then Mark Tober.
Good evening, Council. My name is Benjamin Cogan. I do not live in Los Gatos. I have worked in Los Gatos and have been around the people for 5 years. I am just as much as a citizen as anyone else, and I thank you guys for being here and let me be here. I would like to let you guys know that I'm also a Boy Scout, Eagle Scout. I'm from Troop 37 in Redding, California. Last time I was nervous, and I didn't speak clearly, so I'd like to speak clearly this time. First, let me just tell you the Boy Scout law. And the Boy Scout law is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, brave, clean, and reverent. And when I was a Boy Scout, there was a rifle merit badge and shotgun merit badge. And I couldn't get the shotgun merit badge until I was taller. One of the things that I think that's really important in society, and one of the things I think that we are all missing the picture, is the media has been saying this image of gun control, Feinstein's bill, and all that. But what is really dangerous is a lack of knowledge and respect for firearms. Understanding we are a gun society, will always be a gun society, and you cannot get rid of guns from this society, then having the uttermost respect for guns is crucial. The military has guns, police have guns, and the citizens should be allowed to have guns as well. Now, I read the Second Amendment. You can look it up. But why should we have assault rifles? Because a militia is necessary for the survival of this country, and the right to bear arms shall not be infringed. And if you cannot have an assault rifle, you cannot have a well-regulated militia. And with all the guns that the weapon ammo the government is buying, we need to, once again, go to trust and counsel. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Benjamin. Mark Tober, and then Cameron Stanley.
Madam Mayor, Council, first of all, my kudos to you for being able to put through this meeting, the previous one, and probably the more that are come, so my hearts are out to you. Agenda item 3 is listed as an urgency ordinance. I have to ask the question, where's the urgency? Where's the fire? Where's the crisis? Has there been a plethora of stores requesting permits to open gun stores? Is the community being overrun with rampant gun trafficking? I'm serious. Where's the fire? The council cannot demonstrate any urgency in that regard. And so the other question has to be asked. What's the real driving force behind this urgency ordinance? My impression is that this ordinance, this urgency, is driven by the same people who are urgently trying to drive Templar Sports out of existence. An urgency driven by the right by the desire to deprive people the right to keep and bear arms. But that's just my impression. For all those individuals who are concerned about demanding transparency from Templar Sports, may I suggest that they demonstrate some transparency about their real agenda. I would remind this council that the Jim Crow laws of the South were nothing more than a bunch of nickel and dime ordinances to deprive basic civil rights. This urgency ordinance carries the same foul smell. I encourage you, do not adopt this urgency ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Cameron Stanley, followed by Candace Stanley.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Town Council. My name is Cameron Stanley. I have been a hunter since I was 7 years old. I was taught gun safety, shooting, and laws by firearm experts at the age of 7. At the age of 12, I took my first hunter's safety course. I'm a lifetime member of Safari Club International, and I teach and practice gun safety every day. I can tell you more laws and facts about gun safety than most people in this room. I have hunted on 3 continents and numerous countries. I have hunted 4 out of the Big 5. I am a law-abiding citizen that is going to shop at Templar Sports. I am the next generation of gun owners. Now that I'm 21 years old, I will buy a gun at Templar Sports. And when I do, I will take my basic firearm test. I will have a 10-day waiting period. I will go through a federal background check. It will be a legal firearm. I will read the firearm instructional manual, and I will go to a firearm range to practice. I'm the next generation of firearm gun owners. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Candace Stanley, and then Heather Corzell.
Hello. Good evening, Council. I am Candace Stanley, and I support Templar Sports. I have been educated and trained to use pistols, revolvers, shotguns, and tactical guns. I believe that in order to own a gun, one must be educated in gun safety. Templar Sports is a resource that should be used in order to become educated about proper gun safety and regulations. Templar Sports should be welcomed in this town and not turned down. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Heather Corzell, and then Ilka Van Bromel Reese.
Hello, my name is Heather Corzell. I own a firearm. I'm from Scotts Valley. I'm not from Los Gatos. Many of the people came up here and said, do you have children? Do you live in Los Gatos? Well, many of you weren't a child during Columbine. I was. I was in high school when Columbine hit. It sucked. It hurt. We were all scared. I also became part of the CERT team of Santa Cruz High in order to help if anything like that were to happen. Because I was goth at the time, because I wore a trench coat, I was kicked out of school. You're pretty much doing the same thing. You're asking for a witch hunt. You're sitting here saying that a firearms store that has nothing to do with whether or not people are going to go out and kill people should be here or not. It makes no sense. Witch hunts do nothing but damage our society. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, the last card I have is Ilka Van Bromel Rice. But that is not my last card. All right, Maureen Howard, followed by Eugene Wu. And please, if you're going to speak, fill out your card, get it over to the clerk.
Probably almost the last card for you to get in because it's taken this long to get the courage to come.
If you put the microphone close, thanks.
Is that better? I am a mother, have grown up in Los Gatos, and actually also work at a school within walking distance of Templar Sports. As I have been sitting here tonight listening to everyone, it's pretty easy to understand where both sides are coming from. And I think there's one thing that everybody here would agree with is that we all dislike and hate is violence, acts of violence, the results of acts of violence. Land use has been brought up, fiscal impact has been brought up, but I'm really feeling like the reason this is such an emotional issue is because it's an issue of freedom. And I have, the other credential I have is I've lived overseas for a while, and I have returned to America with a tremendous value for the freedom that we have here. And I just want to encourage you to, it's just one of, I feel like, an area of our basic freedom that we're talking about tonight. And that's, just want to encourage you to vote on the side of the freedom that America stands for. Thank you.
Thank you. Eugene Wu and then Jill Gordon.
Good evening, everyone. I'm actually not from here. I'm from Hayward, but I commute over here to work at a video streaming company right down the other way. I want to talk about some of the moratoriums that here that talks about distance that makes it safe.
Would you please keep the microphone close to you?
Sorry. I want to talk about distance and what a supposed safe distance is to promote public safety from schools and things of that sort. Let's say there is a distance. Is it 10 feet away from the school? Is it 100 feet away? Or how about 1,000 or even a mile? Why don't we sweep it up a store and move it over to San Jose or Campbell? Does that actually make it safer for your general public to not host another gun store around the community? See, I'm from the East Bay, and the fact that I could come over here means that anybody can come into this town, whether they are violent or not. So this is reality. The continual erosion of business and personal rights while empowering government is a slippery slope of what the government can and some loud voices can do. If this passes, it paves the way for any business to be put on moratorium. For example, a cupcake business that is too close to school can be issued a moratorium because it promotes obesity. Does that sound weird? I think it does. But it can happen. Besides the Second Amendment, this leads to the erosion of other amendments too. For example, the 4th and 5th and 14th. Please preserve your personal right and the rights to business. Thanks.
Thank you. Jill Gordon and then Mark Rohr.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak. I just want to say that I am in support of Templar sports. Freedom isn't free. A lot of good people have died for it. And I think it's a part of intolerance. We used to be tolerant. You said something, I disagree, I state my disagreement, we agree to disagree. I could pick up a pen, write a letter to the other, what have you. Second Amendment is very restricted. If I want to express my Second Amendment rights, I have to go to a gun store. I have to go, if I want to be a law-abiding citizen, to an FFL. You can go to any store and find a piece of paper and a pen to write your ideas down. You can pick up your phone, you can get on the internet and talk to anybody at any time. With the Second Amendment, you have to go to a specific place, wait a specific time, follow specific guidelines, which are highly regulated, state, local, federal. These people go through numerous background checks. I feel safer in a gun store than I do at home. I feel safer in a gun store than I do on the street. And even though I'm a sheepdog and I know that nobody is responsible for my safety, I am the one that chooses to be where I am at any given time. If I decide to go walking in East Oakland at 2 in the morning, that is a stupid decision, but it's my decision, and I take full responsibility for it. With the Second Amendment, it is your responsibility to be a law-abiding citizen, know the rules, follow the rules, and behave responsibly and learn how to use that tool effectively. And unfortunately, with this freedom of speech, anybody can speak their mind, whether you agree with it or not. They can be knowledgeable on the subject or have no knowledge, and that doesn't matter, and that is fine. And you can disagree with it. But the Second Amendment requires a lot more strict rules. You cannot just make your own weapon at any time. So thank you very much, and I support Templar Sports.
Mark Rohr.
Hi. I don't currently live in Los Gatos, but I've lived and owned a house in Los Gatos for 25 years, previous to me selling it a few years ago. Someone brought up the tide of the country has changed. Yeah, the tide of the country has changed. In the last 12 years, 31 states have passed right to carry firearms laws. Someone brought up solid research is necessary. The most extensive research done on this subject is by John Lott, more specifically, More Guns, Less Crime. And that gives an amazing amount of statistics worldwide. Basically, gun violence goes up, or not gun violence, violent crimes go up about 40% when you take guns away from a society. Murder goes up, rape goes up, violent crimes go up 40%. You can look at the statistics on the UK, Australia, New Zealand, any way you want to look at it, both directions. It affects whether you take the guns away, the crime goes up 40%. You give the citizens guns, it goes down over 40%. You want to talk about Dianne Feinstein? Dianne Feinstein had a moratorium on pistols. She turned in one of her 38s. The other 38 she has to this day, she has a right to carry. She has people with bodyguards with high-capacity magazines taking care of her safety, but yet she's all high and mighty about taking everybody else's right to safety away. It doesn't make any sense. If anything ever happened in these, you see these massive shootings, who do you think ends these shootings more than the cops do? It's someone with a gun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that was my last card. Is there anyone else? All right, we will now close the public portion of the hearing, and I'm going to give this council they're all looking at me so happily, a 5-minute break, and then we will return and do our deliberations. If you'll please take a seat and quiet down. Staff is present, council's present. The public input portion of the hearing is over, and we'll now look to the council for comments, questions, motion. Council. Ms. Jensen.
Okay, I'll be the brave one to start. Thank you all for your very articulate comments. Thank you all for coming to our third meeting on this. Thank you all for your input. And thank you all for making it very evident that public process is always valuable. The first thing I'd like to say is that I agree with the speakers who have indicated that this is a land use issue. In fact, when our staff first made the presentation, it was given to us by our very capable Sandy Bailey, who's been a longtime member of the planning staff in the town of Los Gatos, and who I've had the privilege to work with as a planning commissioner, where we regularly deal with land use issues. And among those land use issues we deal with are what retail establishments can open, where, and under what conditions. The only thing we're considering tonight is whether to craft new regulations or ordinances with respect to any retail operation which is selling firearms. A temporary moratorium is allowed in the state of California. A town may enact it to protect the public safety, health, and welfare. It may adopt an urgency measure and interim ordinance prohibiting any uses that may be in conflict with a contemplated general plan, specific plan, or zoning proposal that the town is considering or studying or intends to study within a reasonable time. The reason that code, I'm reading from the California Code section 65858, the reason I think, and I'm sure Ms. Propp will correct me if I'm wrong, that the term urgency is used because it's not adopted through the regular process. We would normally adopt an ordinance as through study, through committees, through public input, but sometimes if there's an issue which is urgent enough, which has, urgent, I shouldn't say urgent, which has presented itself in a way that the governing body of a jurisdiction decides that the public health and safety and welfare is put at issue by that use, it may choose to adopt an ordinance. That's the only thing we're considering tonight. We are not considering what an ordinance may look like, whether an ordinance will be adopted, or we are not considering banning guns. In fact, you heard at the start of the meeting that Templar Sports will not be affected by the moratorium. We are considering whether the town wants to enact ordinances which regulate the zoning and location of a firearms dealer. And that is actually allowed under the Second Amendment, and Heller versus District of Columbia, which many of you have cited, indicates that the right secured by the Second Amendment is not unlimited, and that it does not, the decision that the court made doesn't affect laws imposing conditions and qualifications on the commercial sale of arms. That is actually the law in the United States, and we are not prohibited from considering zoning or land use considerations with respect to any kind of moratorium or zoning that we think is appropriate. And as we've indicated earlier, nearness to schools, nearness to parks is an appropriate consideration. In fact, the state of California has a gun-free school zone law. So the state of California has determined that that's an appropriate zoning consideration. That would be something that the town of Los Gatos could consider without violating anyone's Second Amendment rights. So, Madam Mayor, without going into detail on my motion, I would start with an indication that I would intend to move to adopt the interim ordinance. I do have some suggestions for the draft that we've received, but I'll just start with a motion to adopt on the principle of an interim ordinance under 65858, the California moratorium law.
Ms. Jensen, clarification, is this a motion or not?
Well, I guess that it's more appropriate at this point just to say that this would be, I don't know how you want me to proceed. I think it's appropriate maybe to consider, I have a lot of suggestions for a draft moratorium, but perhaps a motion should wait for discussion of other council members.
All right, fine. So since this is not a motion, do you want to give us your input as to what, if anything, you would do differently?
I just had some suggestions. I know that the council all has before it the draft moratorium that was prepared by our staff. So I have a suggestion for substitution of one paragraph to another, and I have some suggestions for additional findings. But they are sufficiently specific that perhaps it's better to see where other council members are going.
All right, and I will do that. But are you talking about attachment 1 in our binder, or are you talking about our desk item? As far as what you want?
The desk, I know that Ms. Prop gave us changes in the original draft moratorium that we got, which was, I guess, item 1 in our packet.
Was attachment 1.
Attachment 1. For example, there was a suggestion to change some of the language to reflect federal language from explosive devices to destructive devices. There was a suggestion by Ms. Prop to insert commercial establishment to distinguish it from person-to-person sales. So that's part of our desk item, I know, and so that would be part of what I would suggest, but I would also suggest other things.
All right, so what I hear you saying is that you're prepared to make a motion, however, and that a motion would amend some of the materials that we have, but you want to see how other council members weigh in.
Correct.
All right, anybody else want to speak to this? Mr. Larson?
Madam Mayor, just to assist you and the council, we did have one slide available. That was the potential modified language provided in the desk item. It was the last bullet in the desk item that Councilmember Jensen just referenced, just for the publics, because they may not have read the desk item.
Thank you. All right, council? Ms. McNutt?
Thank you, Mayor. Could we look at the list of actions that we have to take and clarify for me where we have which discussion? So the clerk administrator reading the title proposed ordinance, is that steps 1, 2, and 3, is that, and steps 1 and 2, is that all before we really get into discussing a motion on the actual wording of the ordinance?
I have my opinion on how that goes, but I'm going to defer to Ms. Prop.
Thank you, Council and Mayor.
Ms. Prop, would you get real close to your mic?
Okay. The proposal, the recommendation is that the clerk administrator read the title of the proposed ordinance. It's as recommended to the town council. Town council would discuss and make any required findings, waive the reading of the urgency ordinance, which is a separate motion, and then make any motions and move to adopt an urgency ordinance. And then, so there's 2 motions that have to be made, waiving the reading as well as motion to either adopt or adopt with modifications or motion not to adopt.
Let me follow up, and then we can go back to Ms. McNutt. I think the confusion for me is we have a proposal under attachment 1, and yet your first proposed motion is to make the required findings, and if this council wants to amend attachment 1 or amend any of this paperwork, how could we start with making the required findings?
The proposal is to ask the clerk administrator to read the title of the proposed ordinance. have a discussion regarding that, including the required findings. And if the required findings can be made, make the appropriate motions. The mayor and council can take it in whatever order that they want to, so long as part of tonight's discussion is that the title is read, that the motion, and that findings are made for any motions that are made.
Ms. McNutt?
Yeah. So I would suggest that maybe we have the clerk administrator read the title, get that out of the way, and then we start discussing any changes that we would like to see on the proposed ordinance, and then let that discussion flow from there. Does that sound like a good plan?
Yeah, that sounds fine. If we could ask the clerk administrator to read the title of the proposed ordinance.
An urgency ordinance of the Town of Los Gatos imposing a temporary moratorium on the establishment of commercial operations engaged in the sale of firearms, ammunition, and/or explosive devices within the Town of Los Gatos and declaring the urgency thereof.
All right, so that is the title as reflected also in Attachment 1. Discussion. Ms. McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. So if this is an appropriate time, then I do have a couple of changes to the proposed wording that I would like to discuss with council. One is, this is not the first time that we've had an urgency ordinance of a controversial nature. Back in 2003, council adopted one to stop the approval of any new personal service businesses in the downtown district until new language could be put into place, new policies that would determine what would be the appropriate zoning location for personal service businesses in our retail dining area. I keep trying to pull out the emotion and the fear that many people feel, including myself on occasion, regarding the violence, and pull out the concern about Second Amendment rights and keep focused on what is the appropriate role of a town council. And it's all about land use, is what you keep hearing over and over. So I find a lot of help in looking at the ordinance that was used in 2003, and there is some language in that I would like to incorporate that I think strengthens. And we were all given copies of that as part of our desk item tonight. And in particular, the line...
Ms. McNutt, I'm going to jump in here. This was desk item, since we have a lot of paper, this was a desk item that was called Attachment 5?
Correct.
All right, go ahead, please.
And it's the second whereas. So currently in the second whereas of the proposed ordinance that we're looking at tonight, it says, whereas the sale of firearms and ammunition are not currently regulated under the Los Gatos Town Code. And what I think would be helpful to add is a phrase that picks up from the second whereas from the 2003 that says something like, nor does it contain adequate procedures for investigating and addressing the impact of a new firearms sales business in the town of Los Gatos. I think what has been so distressing to so many people, and we heard about trust early on tonight, was the fact that there was a gap in our town code that didn't require any kind of review process, as we do for so many other types of businesses in Los Gatos. So I would like to emphasize that as part of the reasoning why we see this from a land use perspective as being something necessary to put a pause, we're on pause, while we develop the right language and then move forward from there. So do you want my second one, or do you want to have discussion on that one right now?
Is there discussion on this suggestion? Mr. Brzezinski?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I agree with Councilwoman McNutt. I think that this is an appropriate insertion because it puts some clarity in the fact that what we are attempting to do is very, very concrete. And it is to develop language that we do not have currently. And usually when we develop this language, it is in response to some situation that's presented itself to us. We don't have many parts of our ordinance language that are somehow divinely presented us. They are the product of situational interventions and our attempt as a community to try to accommodate that in a way that we can bring order to a particular case. And I think that's really what the language that Ms. McNutt is proposing is an attempt to do. So I would support that insertion.
All right, further discussion on that concept only. Seeing none, Ms. McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. The second suggestion I have is on the 8th whereas, which would be on the second page of the proposed ordinance. And it's a long whereas that describes firearm violence that has occurred in different places throughout the United States. I am uncomfortable having that as part of the ordinance. I don't see that it supports the rationale for, again, a land use decision or developing land use policies, and it seems, although true, it seems inflammatory language that's unnecessary and adds to, it just takes the conversation in a direction that I don't think that we need to have in an actual ordinance.
Before we get into further discussion of that, since this is, Ms. Propp, it's going to go back to you. Since this is an emergency ordinance relating to moratorium, is that paragraph inserted in there for that reason? Or do you feel as though there are other paragraphs that address the moratorium legal issue?
That would not be an essential paragraph for the council to adopt for this action tonight.
All right, given that it's not essential, anybody else want to weigh in on Ms. McNutt's thoughts on this paragraph? Ms. Jensen.
I agree with Councilwoman McNutt. So this may be the time to talk about specific findings that I would propose that I think are more directed toward Los Gatos as opposed to a national gun discussion, if the mayor thinks that that's appropriate.
Let me hold on before we do that. What I may look for now is we seem to have a consensus on amending the second whereas, deleting the 8th whereas. It might be time for us to get this emergency ordinance on the table before we begin amending it any further. So somebody want to put attachment 1 as part of a motion? Ms. Jensen?
Okay, I'll make a formal motion that we adopt per our continued discussion, or at least adopt an emergency ordinance or an urgency ordinance as it's called under the California statute, to essentially put a moratorium not on Templar Sports, but on future retail firearm sales in the town of Los Gatos pending study of any ordinance going forward.
I would second that.
All right, so we have a motion and a second for an ordinance. By consensus, is paragraph 2 of that ordinance amended to make reference to land use? Anyone disagree with that? Seeing none, is paragraph 8 in its current form deleted by consensus?
Yes.
It is. All right, now does anyone have any modifications? And I'll start with you, Ms. Jensen.
I do have proposed language for other possible findings that are more specific to Los Gatos. Ms. Propp did ask me to make copies of that, which I have, and it can also go on the board. If that's appropriate, I can distribute it. However you want me to proceed.
Ms. Propp?
Ms. Jensen asked if she could make additional findings, and I suggested to her that whatever she was going to present, that it would be helpful to distribute it to council and provide it to the clerk so that it's available for the community also to see as she discusses those.
All right, and how are you? Oh, you do
There you
have
go. So based upon our discussion thus far, it's up on the board. I am not proposing the top or number 1, but I am proposing those findings that are contained after. You can keep going up, Ms. St. John, thank you, till you get to 2. Just put number 2 at the top. There you go. I would propose that we include some version of those findings because I propose them to the council because I think they're more specific to Los Gatos, and they provide a nexus between what Los Gatos is doing for its proposed land use study rather than a national discussion. That's why I propose those. I don't have any authorship pride, so if anyone doesn't like any of them or wants to change them, that's fine with me, but they're just a proposal.
All right, let me see if I understand this. You are proposing that what you have there as the 4 whereases after paragraph numbered 2 be included in the moratorium ordinance?
I am, and I would actually substitute those for paragraph 8 because I think they are more specific to Los Gatos and provide a more of a nexus to our community, and this why we would propose to adopt the ordinance or the moratorium, I should say. That's why those are proposed.
All right, thank you. Discussion. I think everybody's reading.
Mayor, while everyone's reading, we appreciate Ms. Jensen giving this to staff prior to the meeting to review. The one change staff might suggest to council to consider would be in the first whereas under number 2, and it would be since Templar Sports was first scheduled to open on December 22nd, because they actually ended up not opening that day, and we think that's a technical accuracy that would be a good change.
So, Madam Mayor, I agree with that. Could it be since Templar Sports first opened in December 2012?
That would work.
Okay. Staff, any objection to that?
Nope, that's simpler.
All right, so we still have a proposal before us to change the former paragraph 8 whereas to what has been proposed here. Any discussion of that? Ms. McNutt.
Thank you. Through the mayor, I'd like to ask for clarification on the last whereas that describes the location of Templar Sports. I'm not understanding why that would be a justification, because we have not yet determined through our process if any of those items are actually of concern to us. That'll be what comes next, is figuring out what locations from a land use perspective are sensitive to firearm sales. So the fact that they are located in this place, I don't understand the nexus or the justification of that.
All right, and I actually at this juncture, I would concur. Ms. Jensen.
I wonder, and I don't have any objection to that, I wonder if including a reference such as if now it goes, well, actually it's at the top on the board, which says we would put it back into paragraph, whereas number 2, actually it was just fine where it was. The last sentence, I think at the top, which says that some of the concerns raised included, which occurred at, now I can't see it anymore. So if you put it down. Sorry. Councilwoman McNutt suggested changing the whereas number 2, which talked about the fact that the town doesn't have ordinances, etc. I wonder if it'd be appropriate to include the language that's there in the last sentence, which indicates that part of the study would be to include the impacts of such a location, and I think that's on the last paragraph under number 1. Because it would not be a finding, it would be a finding that these are things that should be studied.
All right, I'm going to agree that that last whereas should not go. On the whereas portion of our proposed ordinance. But quite frankly, Ms. Jensen, I don't see where you want to put it. Under proposed findings?
Oh, no, I'm happy to take that off the table. What I'm suggesting is that in our new whereas number 2, which Councilwoman McNutt proposed and which was approved by consensus, that it may be appropriate to add the last sentence under number 1, which is now at the top of the document, which talks about location. It says, schools in close proximity to such establishments, among other public health, safety, and welfare impacts, which would include a specific reference to a study of location.
Ms. McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'm tracking what she's saying. So just if I can repeat it. So the whereas number 2 would now read, whereas the sale of firearms and ammunition are not currently regulated under the Los Gatos Town Code, nor does it contain adequate procedures for investigating and addressing the impacts of such businesses on the town as a whole, including the safety of the public at large, in particular students attending schools in close proximity to such establishments, among other public health, safety, and welfare impacts.
Yes, that's my intent.
All right, by consensus, does anybody disagree with that? Seeing none, further discussion. Ms. McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. Since staff had an opportunity to see Ms. Jensen's language earlier, have we confirmed these suicide statistics? Do we know these? I know they were submitted to us from residents, but
we do, the chief has just shared that we do know the most recent study showed that we had the highest in the county. We don't have verification of that firearms are used in the majority of those cases. It could be, we just don't have the verification here with us right now.
yeah, I mean, if that's true, I think it's perfectly acceptable and desirable to have that in there, but I think we need to be careful about putting a whereas in if we don't have it absolutely validated.
Further discussion. Mr. Brzezinski.
I'd like to follow up on this particular issue. Yes, that was my concern about that third whereas, that I am aware of the statistics relative to the town's ratio to the other 14 cities in the county. I was recently serving on the Santa Clara County Suicide Prevention Oversight Committee, and it is indeed true. But I do not think it's verified that last phrase, the firearms are used in the majority of such cases. I don't think we can verify that unless there is data that supports it tonight. I think that the statistic stands on its own, and it would be it's important for us to know that. But I do think that there's national statistics that indicates that. But I don't think the national statistics are necessarily applicable locally unless we have more specific information.
Madam Mayor.
A question of staff. Given the potential uncertainty of that fact, what would staff's recommendation be?
I wanted to suggest to the council, and firearms are used in many such deaths.
Ms. McNutt? Mr. Brzezinski?
That's acceptable.
Ms. Jensen? I'm not asking you. Yet. All right, further discussion. We have a motion.
No, we don't.
Oh, do we have a motion?
Yes, we do.
I think we have a motion to adopt an emergency ordinance, and then we're discussing possible modifications, but I don't think we've had a formal motion with respect to that.
Okay, we have a motion. We've had consensus modifications to that motion, which deals with ordinance attachment 1. Is there a second to the motion?
I think I seconded it.
Okay, Mr. Brzezinski, further discussion? The staff want to summarize our current motion with all of its modifications, and I would ask council, please listen because we're going toward a vote.
So working off of attachment 1 to the original staff report, the second whereas is modified as read by Councilwoman McNutt to say, whereas the sale of firearms and ammunition are not, oops, I want to make sure I have the other document, where the sales of firearms and ammunition are not currently regulated under the Los Gatos Town Code, nor does it contain adequate procedures for investigation and addressing the impact of new firearms, the impacts of new firearms businesses in the town of Los Gatos. The impacts of such businesses on the town as a whole, including to safety of the public at large, and in particular to students attending schools in close proximity to such establishments, among other public health, safety, and welfare impacts. And I said the clause, the town of Los Gatos, twice. It would only be in there once.
All right, thank you.
Then moving on down to page 2, the 8th whereas is deleted. That is the longest of the whereases. And then we're adding 3 other whereases from Councilwoman Jensen's sheet. And it would be the first 3 whereases under number 2 on the screen, with the last one being modified, and firearms are used in many such deaths. And those were the changes.
All right, so that is the motion on the floor.
Just for
Discussion.
clarification.
Ms. Propp.
I believe it was also the motion, the maker of the motion, Councilmember Jensen's intent to incorporate the proposed changes in the desk item, which include in section 2, the changes of the language to read in the middle of paragraph 2, that no new person or entity shall operate, manage, or conduct the commercial operations for the sale of firearms and or destructive devices, and to change explosive to destructive anywhere in the ordinance where it appeared.
That's what I understood, Ms. McNutt. Excuse me, Ms. Jensen.
That's correct.
Hold on, that is correct with you and Mr. Brzezinski?
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Jensen.
One other item, Mr. Larson didn't mention that the first paragraph we indicated was going to be changed to since opening in December 2012 without the specific date.
Thank you.
That is correct. Mr. Brzezinski?
That's correct.
All right, now do we have all the modifications? Discussion of the motion as a whole. Right? Mr. Brzezinski?
Well, I'll make this brief. Appreciate the intensity of the points of view of everyone who spoke tonight and in our 2 previous meetings. Obviously, this is a very divisive and conflicted issue, not only for the town of Los Gatos, but for most of our surrounding communities, state of California, and the nation as a whole. But a couple of the people indicated tonight in their presentation that we have an opportunity to take care of ourselves. And so much of what was discussed tonight from the point of view of the rights to freedom specified that we need to be responsible for ourselves. And I think that's what we're attempting to do. We as a community are looking for ways to be responsible for ourselves, that we necessarily have to look at the various issues that surround us, look at the various consequences of our being in community, and realize that freedom is not license. Freedom is the opportunity to be able to express and take responsibility, and at the same time live within the boundaries of a community, which means that we have the opportunity to preserve our rights and respect the rights of others. And I think that's really what we're attempting to do here. As I read what has been evolved tonight, it seems to me very, very significant that the Los Gatos community can say, we have an opportunity now to take a look into the future to make good decisions about how we want to develop this particular land use. And with that, I trust that we will be back together again, all of us, at a certain point in the future to discuss whatever things evolve as a result of our taking the time to look carefully. But I think it's because we have a community that really cares deeply about its well-being and the well-being of each of our neighbors that we're here tonight. And the process, although it's been onerous, I think has really worked and worked to our advantage. So I'm going to be supporting this motion.
Further discussion? Well, I will be supporting the motion. As I've said, this is our third meeting. I actually think the speakers were running out of energy there too. But I will be supporting this motion. First of all, once again, I want to commend you. Some of you have very different opinions, and you have a passion for those opinions, and yet you sat here and you listened to one another. And as a member of this council, I do appreciate that. All we are doing with this motion, I'm assuming it'll pass, but all we are doing with this motion is saying, time out, let the staff and the council see what, if anything, we should do in this community on our land use for gun sales. And I will have to say that for many people, the fact that Templar came forward without a public debate was of great concern, and trust me, we get that. And now we've had 3 hearings after the fact, but still it gave us the opportunity to hear all of you, and it gives staff and then us the opportunity to weigh those views into whatever we do going forward. So thank you very much, and as I said, I will be supporting the motion. Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Mr. Larson.
And Madam Mayor, if we could parse the actions as reflected in the staff recommendation. So number 1 would be to make the required findings as amended in attachment 1 through your prior action.
As my understanding is the motion that we just made fulfills making the required findings. Am I incorrect?
You are correct.
Okay.
However, it does require that you actually have a separate vote on waiving the reading of the urgency ordinance.
All right, may I have a motion on that? Mr. Leonardis?
Move to waive the reading of the urgency ordinance.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
We have another motion. Number 3.
That's the motion you already
Oh, that was the
adopted.
one, okay. And then I will instruct the clerk to publish the urgency ordinance within 15 days after adoption. Are you all going to do that, huh? Now, Mr. Larson, Ms. Prop, is there anything else you need?
Not tonight on this action item.
All right, does council have anything further? Seeing none, this will conclude this agenda item, and unless staff has anything, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Seeing none, meeting is adjourned. you.